Excuse me, you're in the wrong section. First class is for actual paying customers.
The words cut through the cabin like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Patricia Whitmore didn't whisper her demand. She announced it loud enough for every passenger in first class to hear her voice, dripping with the kind of authority that comes from a lifetime of never being told no. The man sitting quietly in seat 1A looked up from his book. Dr. Vincent Harrington, 48 years old, met Patricia's glare with calm, steady eyes. He was dressed simply black polo shirt, dark jeans, and a watch that cost less than most people's rent. In his hands was a worn first-edition copy of The Intelligent Investor. "This is my assigned seat, ma'am," Vincent said quietly. Patricia Whitmore, 52, stood in the aisle like a roadblock. Her designer outfit screamed money cream-colored blazer pearls that caught the cabin light and a handbag that cost more than most people's cars. Behind her, her husband Harold shuffled nervously, already apologizing with his posture for whatever his wife was about to do. "I don't think so," Patricia snapped, waving her boarding pass like a weapon. "Show me your real ticket." Vincent closed his book with a soft sound that somehow felt final. "My seat isn't for sale." The cabin went silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the hum of the Boeing 767's engines seemed to quiet, as if the plane itself was holding its breath. "Richard and I are flying together," Patricia announced, turning to address the flight attendant who had just appeared. Sarah Mitchell, 28, Hispanic with worried eyes and a name tag that read, "Lead Flight Attendant," looked between Patricia and Vincent like a referee stepping into a boxing ring. "We specifically requested 1A and 1B. Patricia continued, "This gentleman is in 1A. He needs to move back to business or economy so my husband can sit next to me." Sarah checked her tablet fingers, trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. Dr. Harrington is a confirmed passenger in 1A. The seat was booked 3 weeks ago. Your husband is confirmed in 2B just behind you. That is unacceptable." Patricia's voice rose an octave and the entire first-class cabin turned to stare. "Do you know who my husband is? He is the CFO of Morrison Industries. We are Platinum Elite members. We do not sit apart." She turned back to Vincent, her face hardening into something ugly. "Look, I don't know how you got an upgrade, but I'm willing to write you a check for $500 right now to move back to row 30 where you belong." Vincent didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said no. That single word hung in the air like a challenge. Patricia Whitmore wasn't used to hearing the word no, certainly not from a man who looked like Vincent. Her face flushed red and she pressed the call button repeatedly aggressively. "Get the gate agent," she demanded of Sarah. "Get the manager now." From seat 3A, Miguel Santos, a 24-year-old marketing student, quietly pulled out his phone. Something told him this wasn't going to end well. In seat 2B, Dr. Amanda Foster, a cardiologist from Boston, leaned forward, her medical training already assessing the tension in the air. Sarah Mitchell had been a flight attendant for 6 years. She'd seen her share of difficult passengers, but this felt different. The woman's anger was sharp-focused and completely unreasonable. The man in 1A hadn't done anything wrong. He was sitting quietly reading a book, minding his own business. "Ma'am, I can see if there are any other first-class seats available," Sarah offered. "I don't want another seat," Patricia hissed. "I want this seat, and I want him out of it." Vincent looked up at Sarah and offered a tired smile. "I'm Dr. Vincent Harrington. I have a confirmed reservation for seat 1A. I paid full fare 3 weeks ago. I'm not causing any trouble." "He's lying," Patricia snapped. "Check his credit card. I bet it's stolen." The accusation hung in the air like a slap. Dr. Foster gasped audibly. Miguel Santos started recording. Even Harold Whitmore looked embarrassed by his wife's words. "Ma'am, I can't," Sarah began. "Call security," Patricia interrupted. "This man is being aggressive and hostile." "I feel threatened." Vincent hadn't moved from his seat. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even uncrossed his arms. He was sitting perfectly still, hands folded on his lap, looking about as hostile as a monk in meditation. But Patricia's words had power. In the ecosystem of commercial aviation, the phrase "I feel threatened" was like pulling a fire alarm. It set protocols in motion that were hard to stop once they started rolling. Sarah looked at Vincent, then at Patricia, then at the growing crowd of passengers who were now openly staring. She made a decision that would cost her airline billions of dollars. "I'll call the gate supervisor," she said quietly. Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that comes from winning a game you've played many times before. Finally. Some action. Vincent opened his book again, but he wasn't reading. He was remembering. He was remembering another airport, another time, another humiliation. He was remembering the promise he'd made to himself 20 years ago in Chicago, O'Hare. Never again would he be powerless. Today that promise was about to be tested. From the galley, Sarah Mitchell picked up the interphone. Her hands were shaking as she dialed the gate supervisor's extension. She had a feeling that whatever happened next would change everything. "Roberto, we have a situation in first class," she said into the phone. "Can you come aboard?" In the terminal, Roberto Valdez, 35 years old, bilingual and under constant pressure to keep flights on time, grabbed his radio and headed for gate B47. He was already having a bad day. The last thing he needed was a passenger dispute holding up the evening departure to London. He had no idea that the next 10 minutes would destroy his career, bankrupt an airline, and change the aviation industry forever. As he walked down the jet bridge, Patricia Whitmore was already preparing her performance. Harold was shrinking into his seat. Vincent was marking his page with a silver bookmark, and Miguel Santos was making sure his phone was fully charged. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that remained was for the curtain to rise on one of the most expensive mistakes in aviation history. Roberto Valdez walked onto Flight 618 with the confident stride of a man who solved problems for a living. At 35, he'd been a gate supervisor for Skywing Airlines for 8 years, and he thought he'd seen everything. Overbooked flights, angry passengers, mechanical delays, weather issues. He handled them all with efficiency and just enough authority to make people listen. Today was different. Today he was walking into a situation that would end his career in the next 15 minutes. "What seems to be the problem?" Roberto asked, approaching the first-class cabin with his tablet in hand and his supervisor badge gleaming under the cabin lights. Patricia Whitmore pounced immediately. "This man," she pointed a manicured finger at Vincent, "is refusing to accommodate a Platinum Elite member. He is being aggressive and hostile, and I want him removed from this aircraft immediately." Roberto looked at Vincent. The man was sitting perfectly still, hands folded on his lap, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked about as hostile as a librarian during quiet hours. But Roberto saw what Patricia wanted him to see. A wealthy white woman in obvious distress, and a black man in casual clothes sitting in a seat that cost $12,000. His bias kicked in hard and fast, shaped by years of assumptions and unwritten rules about who belonged where. He didn't check the manifest carefully. He didn't ask for Vincent's side of the story. He made an instant judgment call that would cost Skywing Airlines $4.3 billion. Sir Roberto said, his voice loud enough for the cabin to hear, "I need to see your boarding pass." Vincent looked up calmly and held out his ticket. Dr. Vincent Harrington, Seat 1A, departing Miami at 8:15 p.m. for London Heathrow. Roberto glanced at the pass, but he wasn't really reading it. He was operating on autopilot, following a script he'd written in his own mind about who caused problems and who deserved respect. "Dr. Harrington, we have a priority situation here. We need to accommodate a family traveling together. I'm going to need you to deplane so we can rebook you on tomorrow morning's flight." "I have a board meeting in London at 9 a.m., Vincent said calmly. "I am not deplaning." I paid full fare for this seat 3 weeks ago. We are overbooked. Roberto lied smoothly. And per airline policy, we have the right to remove passengers for operational necessity. You are the one we've selected. It was a lie. The flight wasn't overbooked. The computer monitor showed 3 empty seats in economy. But Roberto was committed now to a course of action that felt right in his gut, even though his gut was completely wrong. Vincent's voice remained steady, but something shifted in his eyes. Selected based on what criteria? The timestamp of my booking, my fare class, or something else? Mr. Valdez Roberto's face flushed. He hated being questioned, especially by passengers who didn't know their place. It's based on the fact that I'm the supervisor and I'm telling you to get off this plane. You're causing a disturbance. I haven't raised my voice once, Vincent noted quietly. She has. He nodded toward Patricia, who was now standing with her arms crossed, watching the confrontation like it was entertainment. From seat 2B, Dr. Amanda Foster spoke up. Excuse me, but that's correct. This gentleman has been sitting quietly the entire time. He hasn't been disruptive at all. Patricia whirled around. Stay out of this. You don't know what you're talking about. Miguel Santos, in seat 3A, held his phone steady and kept recording. He'd been filming since Patricia's first demand, and his Instagram followers were climbing rapidly. The live stream now had over 200 viewers, and the number was growing every minute. Roberto felt the situation slipping away from him. Too many witnesses, too many opinions, too much attention. He needed to end this quickly and decisively. Sir, this is your last warning, Roberto said, puffing out his chest. Leave the aircraft voluntarily, or I will have law enforcement remove you. And if they remove you, you'll be placed on the no-fly list. Do you understand? Vincent looked at Roberto. He looked at Patricia. He looked at the passengers who were now openly filming with their phones. Then he smiled, a calm, knowing smile that should have been Roberto's first warning that something was very wrong with his assessment of the situation. I understand perfectly, Vincent said quietly. Do what you feel you have to do. But I suggest you check the passenger manifest one more time before you touch me. I don't care who you are, Roberto spat. He turned toward the aircraft door and waved his hand. Security. Get him out of here. What Roberto didn't know, what none of them knew, was exactly who they were about to assault. Dr. Vincent Harrington was not just any passenger. He was not an upgraded frequent flyer or a lucky lottery winner who'd stumbled into first class. He was the founder and CEO of Harrington Capital Group, one of the most powerful private equity firms in the world. His net worth exceeded $8.7 billion, making him richer than some small countries. But more importantly for Skywing Airlines, Harrington Capital Group owned 18% of Skywing's stock. They held $2.3 billion in Skywing bonds, credit facilities, and derivative instruments. Vincent personally sat on Skywing's board of directors through shell companies, though he'd never attended a meeting in person, preferring to vote through proxies. He was in financial terms Skywing's biggest single investor, and in exactly 14 hours, he would become their biggest nightmare. Vincent had chosen to fly commercial tonight instead of taking his private Gulfstream for a specific reason. For the past 6 months, his office had been receiving complaints about discrimination at Skywing Airlines. Reports filtered in through social media, through emails to his foundation, through conversations with other wealthy black executives who'd been treated poorly by Skywing staff. Vincent had wanted to see for himself whether these reports were true. So he'd bought a first-class ticket under his real name, dressed down, and decided to fly as anonymously as possible. It was a test of Skywing's corporate culture when they didn't know they were being watched. They were failing that test spectacularly. As Roberto waved for security, Vincent's mind drifted back to another airport, another humiliation 20 years earlier. Chicago O'Hare, October 2004. He'd been 28 then, a young investment banker who'd just closed his first major deal. He was flying business class to celebrate. but the gate agent had looked at his casual Friday clothes and questioned whether his ticket was really his. "Are you sure this ticket belongs to you?" the agent had asked, loud enough for other passengers to hear. "Excuse me," Vincent had replied. "It's just that this is a pretty expensive ticket for someone your age." The implication was clear, though never spoken aloud. The agent had called security just to verify the ticket's authenticity. Vincent had been questioned for 20 minutes, missed his flight, and spent the night in a Chicago airport hotel burning with humiliation and fury. That night, sitting alone in the generic hotel room, Vincent had made a promise to himself. Never again would he be powerless. Never again would someone judge him by his appearance and find him wanting. Never again would he be the victim of someone else's assumptions. He'd kept that promise. He'd built a financial empire worth billions. He'd accumulated power, influence, and resources. And tonight on Skywing Flight 6118, that promise was about to be tested in the most expensive way possible. 3 officers from the airport security contractor entered the aircraft. They weren't police officers. They were private security guards in uniforms paid minimum wage to deal with airline problems that gate agents couldn't handle. The lead officer was James Brennan, 38 years old, ex-military with a chip on his shoulder and a tendency to use force first and ask questions later. Behind him came Officer Lisa Rodriguez, 32, a rookie who needed this job to pay off her student loans. And bringing up the rear was Officer Mike Turner, 29, who'd been fired from 2 previous security jobs for excessive force but had somehow slipped through Skywing's background check process. "Let's go," Pal Brennan grunted, cracking his knuckles. "You're holding up the flight." Vincent looked up at the 3 officers and felt a familiar chill. This was the moment his 20-year promise would be tested. This was the moment he'd find out whether all his wealth and power meant anything when faced with 3 men in uniforms who'd already decided he was the problem. "I am not moving," Vincent said quietly, gripping the armrests of his seat. What happened next would be replayed on news channels around the world for weeks. It would cost Skywing Airlines their reputation, their stock price, and ultimately their existence as an independent company. But more than that, it would prove that some mistakes are so expensive, so publicly humiliating, and so morally wrong that they can't be undone with apologies or settlements or carefully crafted public relations campaigns. Some mistakes can only be paid for in full. Officer Brennan didn't try to negotiate. He didn't ask questions. He didn't even hesitate. The moment Vincent said he wasn't moving, Brennan grabbed him by the lapels of his black polo shirt and yanked. "Stop!" Dr. Foster screamed from seat 2B. "He's not resisting. You don't need to use force." But Brennan wasn't listening to a passenger. He was listening to years of training that taught him that non-compliance required immediate physical response. Vincent, a man of peace but not weakness, tensed his muscles and anchored himself to the seat. The sound of expensive fabric tearing ripped through the cabin. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward, grabbing Vincent's left arm while Turner took his right. Together, the 3 men wrenched Vincent from his seat with the kind of violence usually reserved for actual criminals, not passengers reading books. Vincent's head struck the armrest as they pulled him free. A trickle of blood ran down from his temple, staining his torn polo shirt. His reading glasses flew off, skittering down the aisle and coming to rest near row 5. "My God," whispered Jennifer Walsh, the passenger in seat 4C. "They're hurting him." Patricia Whitmore watched the violence with satisfaction. Finally, she muttered to her husband, "Someone who knows how to handle these situations." But Harold was looking pale, his hands shaking as he watched 3 officers drag a bleeding man down the aisle. "Patricia," he whispered, "maybe we should—" "Don't you dare!" she hissed back. He brought this on himself. Miguel Santos's phone trembled in his hands, but he kept filming. His Instagram live viewer count had climbed to over 800 people, and the comments were exploding with outrage and disbelief. "This is insane," Miguel whispered into his phone. "They're dragging a man off the plane." He did nothing wrong, just sitting there reading. Vincent went limp. It was a technique of nonviolent resistance he'd learned studying the civil rights movement, but it also forced the officers to haul his dead weight. They dragged him by his arms down the narrow aisle, his expensive loafers bumping against the seats as they went. Passengers were crying out, some in horror, some in anger. Dr. Foster was on her feet shouting medical advice. "You're injuring him. He could have a concussion. Stop this immediately." Sarah Mitchell was sobbing, her hands pressed to her mouth. In 6 years of flying, she'd never seen anything like this. She'd called for a supervisor to help resolve a seating dispute, not to watch a passenger get assaulted. The blood from Vincent's head injury left small drops on the cream-colored carpet as they dragged him toward the aircraft door. 89 passengers watched in stunned silence as 3 uniformed men removed a quiet, injured man who had committed no crime other than sitting in his assigned seat. At the door of the aircraft, Brennan and Turner didn't gently escort Vincent to the terminal. They threw him out, literally. Vincent hit the jet bridge floor hard, his torn shirt riding up his hands, scraping against the metal grating. "Don't come back," Turner snarled, standing over Vincent's prone form. "And if you try to rebook on this airline, we'll be waiting." Vincent lay on the jet bridge floor for a moment, tasting blood and feeling the familiar burn of humiliation from 20 years ago. But this time was different. This time he wasn't a powerless young banker. This time he had resources. Slowly, carefully, Vincent pushed himself to his feet. His head was pounding. His shirt was ruined, and his shoulder throbbed where they'd wrenched him from the seat. But his mind was crystal clear. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Marcus," he said quietly to his assistant. "I need the car at Miami International immediately. Terminal B Gate 47, and Marcus, call the legal team. Tell them to activate the Skywing protocol." Back on the aircraft, the passengers were in shock. Miguel Santos was narrating for his Instagram followers, his voice shaking with adrenaline. They just threw him off the plane. Literally threw him. I've never seen anything like this. Dr. Foster was checking the blood drops on the carpet with her medical bag, documenting potential evidence of injury. "This is assault," she said loudly, addressing no one in particular. "That man was injured and they threw him out like garbage." Patricia Whitmore had settled into seat 1A with a satisfied smile. Finally, she told Harold, "Peace and quiet. That's what happens when people try to take things that don't belong to them." But her celebration was premature, because in the terminal, Vincent Harrington was making phone calls that would change everything. The first call was to Dr. Elena Vasquez at Miami General Hospital. "Dr. Vasquez, this is Vincent Harrington. I need to come in for a head injury evaluation. Yes, I'll be there in 30 minutes. And doctor, I'll need complete documentation of all injuries." The second call was to Marcus Thompson, his personal assistant. "Marcus, I need you to pull the Skywing files immediately. All of them. Stock positions, bond holdings, credit facilities, board seats, everything. And get me Janet Morrison from BlackRock on video call within the hour." The third call was to Rebecca Chen at Morrison Stevens & Associates, his legal team. "Rebecca, it's Vincent. I need full activation of the Skywing legal protocol. Yes, the nuclear option. They just physically assaulted me and threw me off an aircraft." The fourth call was to David Kim at Harrington Capital Group. "David, as of right now, we are liquidating every Skywing position. Everything. Stock bonds, credit facilities, derivatives. I want it all sold at market open Monday morning." By the time Vincent finished his calls, Flight 618 was pushing back from the gate. Patricia Whitmore was sipping champagne in seat 1A, completely unaware that her 5 minutes of satisfaction had just cost Skywing Airlines their biggest investor. At Miami General Hospital, Dr. Vasquez examined Vincent's injuries with the thoroughness of someone who knew this would likely end up in court. Concussion protocol CT scans, photographs of all injuries, blood work, and detailed documentation of every scrape, bruise, and cut. Mr. Harrington, Dr. Vasquez said as she cleaned the cut on his temple. I have to ask. What happened to you? I was assaulted by 3 security officers for the crime of sitting in my assigned airplane seat, Vincent replied calmly. Dr. Vasquez paused in her work. I'm sorry. What Vincent smiled grimly. You'll see it on the news tomorrow, along with every major financial network in the world. While Vincent was being treated, Miguel Santos's video was already going viral. The original Instagram Live had been viewed by over 3,000 people, and screen recordings were being shared across Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Reddit. The hashtags Skywing Assault and Flight Discrimination were beginning to trend. News outlets were picking up the story. And somewhere in corporate America, Skywing's crisis management team was about to have the worst weekend of their professional lives. Dr. Amanda Foster had made it her personal mission to document everything. Her Twitter thread, complete with medical analysis of Vincent's visible injuries, was being retweeted thousands of times. I'm a cardiologist. I witnessed a man being physically assaulted and dragged off Skywing Air Flight 608 tonight. He was sitting quietly in his assigned seat reading a book. He was injured and bleeding. This was assault, pure and simple. Skywing assault. The thread continued with detailed medical observations, passenger testimony, and a demand for criminal charges against the officers involved. Jennifer Walsh from Seat 4C had recorded the entire incident on her phone and immediately uploaded it to YouTube with the title, Man Dragged Off Plane for Sitting While Black. Within 6 hours, it had over 50,000 views. But the most damaging piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, the aircraft's own security cameras. Every commercial airliner is equipped with multiple cameras that record continuously during ground operations and flight. Skywing's legal team would later realize that their own equipment had recorded high-definition footage of their employees and contractors assaulting a passenger. By Sunday morning, less than 12 hours after Vincent was thrown off the plane, the story was trending on every major social media platform. CNN had picked it up. Fox News was running it. The BBC was calling it another American aviation assault scandal. But the real damage was happening in private conference rooms and secure phone calls across the financial district. Because while the public saw a story about discrimination and violence, the investment community was beginning to understand something much more serious. They were beginning to realize that Skywing Airlines had just assaulted their biggest investor. Janet Morrison from BlackRock was the first to make the connection. As soon as she saw Vincent's name in the news reports, she checked Harrington Capital Group's filing with the SEC and felt her stomach drop. She immediately called Vincent's secure line. Vincent, please tell me this is not what I think it is. Vincent was sitting in his Miami hotel room, an ice pack on his temple and legal documents spread across the bed. It's exactly what you think it is, Janet. They threw me off the plane. Literally. Vincent, you own 18% of that company. Not anymore. As of market open tomorrow, Harrington Capital Group will have 0 Skywing exposure. There was a long pause on the line. Vincent, if you dump $2.3 billion in Skywing stock at once, you'll crater their share price. That's the point, Janet. The pension funds, the retirement accounts, the index funds, you'll wipe out billions in value for ordinary investors. Vincent's voice was quiet, but firm. They should have thought about that before they decided to judge me by the color of my skin instead of the content of my portfolio. By Sunday evening, the story had evolved from a simple assault case to a potential financial catastrophe. Business reporters were calling sources at Skywing. Stock analysts were updating their models. Crisis management firms were working through the weekend. And in Skywing's corporate headquarters, CEO Gerald Hampton was beginning to understand that his company hadn't just assaulted a passenger. They had assaulted the one man who could single-handedly destroy them. Miguel Santos had never had more than 50 followers on Instagram before Saturday night. By Sunday morning, his account had over 10,000 followers, and his video had been viewed more than 200,000 times. "I can't believe this is happening," he said into his phone camera from his Miami hotel room. "My DMs are blowing up. CNN wants to interview me. The Today Show called. All because I filmed what happened on that plane." Miguel wasn't the only one documenting the incident. Dr. Amanda Foster had turned her Twitter account into a real-time news source providing medical analysis and updates as the story developed. Update: Dr. Harrington was treated at Miami General for head trauma and multiple contusions, she tweeted. The medical report will be available for legal proceedings. This was not light force. This was assault that caused injury. Skywing assault. The tweet was retweeted 8,000 times in 4 hours. Jennifer Walsh, the passenger from seat 4C, had uploaded her phone footage to YouTube with detailed descriptions of everything she witnessed. This man was reading a book, she said in the video description. He was quiet, polite, and sitting in his assigned seat. What happened to him was disgusting and illegal. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source: passengers who weren't even on the plane. Rebecca Martinez, a Skywing gate agent who had been working at a nearby gate, heard the commotion and started recording as Vincent was thrown from the aircraft onto the jet bridge. Her video showed the officers literally throwing an injured man onto the metal grating, with Officer Turner standing over him making threats. "This is what Skywing Airlines thinks is appropriate customer service," Rebecca wrote when she posted the video. "And before you ask, yes, I'm a Skywing employee. And yes, I'm ashamed to work for this company." Rebecca was fired Monday morning for violating social media policy. By Monday afternoon, she had a GoFundMe campaign that raised $50,000 and job offers from 3 competing airlines. The social media explosion was unlike anything the aviation industry had ever seen. The hashtag Skywing Assault was trending in 12 countries. Flight discrimination was being used in over 30 languages. Celebrity endorsements started rolling in as A-list actors, musicians, and athletes shared their own stories of discrimination while traveling. LeBron James tweeted, "This could have been me. This could have been any of us. When you pay for a service, you deserve to be treated with dignity." Skywing assault. The tweet got 400,000 likes in 6 hours. Oprah Winfrey shared Miguel's video with the comment, "This is 2024 and we're still doing this. When will it end? Enough is enough. Skywing assault." But the most powerful endorsement came from an unexpected source. Captain Maria Rodriguez, a Skywing pilot for 15 years, who posted a video in uniform. "I've been flying for Skywing for 15 years, she said, sitting in what appeared to be an airport break room. "I've seen discrimination, I've reported it, and I've watched nothing happen. But this is different. This is assault. And I can't pretend I didn't see it." Captain Rodriguez was suspended pending investigation Monday morning. By Wednesday, the pilots' union had voted no confidence in Skywing management. The international media picked up the story with a fury that surprised everyone. The BBC led their Sunday evening news with American airline assault goes viral. Deutsche Welle ran a feature called "Discrimination Costs Company Billions." Al Jazeera's headline read, "Black Billionaires Battle Against Bias." But it was the financial media that truly understood the scope of the disaster. Bloomberg ran the headline, "Skywing Faces Extinction After Assaulting Major Investor." The Wall Street Journal led with "Private Equity Giant Threatens Airline After Assault." The most damaging report came from CNBC's David Faber, who had spent Sunday night pulling SEC filings and corporate documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Faber said on Monday morning's Squawk Box, "Skywing Airlines just assaulted the one man who could destroy them." Harrington Capital Group owns 18% of Skywing's stock, holds over $2 billion in bonds and credit facilities, and essentially controls the airline's access to capital markets. And they just threw him off a plane. Co-host Becky Quick looked stunned. "David, are you saying that Skywing's biggest investor was the passenger in that viral video?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, Becky. And according to my sources, Harrington Capital is liquidating their entire position when markets open this morning." The camera cut to the futures market where Skywing stock was already down 38% in pre-market trading. But the most devastating piece of evidence didn't come from passengers or employees or news reports. It came from Skywing's own security monitor. Every commercial aircraft is equipped with multiple cameras that record continuously. The footage is stored on secure servers and is typically only accessed for safety investigations. But Vincent's legal team had moved quickly to preserve the evidence. The aircraft's internal cameras had recorded everything in high definition. Vincent sitting quietly and reading. Patricia's aggressive confrontation. Roberto's biased assumptions. The security officer's unnecessary violence. Vincent being thrown from the aircraft while bleeding and injured. The footage was crisp clear and completely devastating to Skywing's legal position. There was no way to argue that Vincent had been disruptive or threatening. There was no way to claim the force was justified. The cameras showed exactly what the passengers had filmed: an assault on a customer for no reason other than racial bias. Rebecca Chen, Vincent's lawyer, reviewed the footage Sunday evening and called him immediately. "Vincent, they're done. Completely done. This footage shows everything, and it proves they assaulted you without cause. How bad is it for them? Vincent, this is criminal assault. But more than that, this is going to destroy them financially. Once this footage gets out, no jury in America will side with Skywing." The footage was never released publicly. Vincent's legal team held it in reserve as evidence for criminal and civil proceedings. But its existence became known to Skywing's lawyers, and it completely undermined any attempt at defending their actions. By Monday morning, Skywing's crisis management team was in full panic mode. 3 different public relations firms had been hired. The legal department was working around the clock. Crisis communications specialists were drafting apology letters. But it was too late. The internet had already tried and convicted Skywing Airlines in the court of public opinion. And unlike traditional media scandals that might blow over in a few days, this one had real financial consequences that couldn't be spun away. Because Monday morning, when markets opened, Vincent Harrington was about to prove that sometimes revenge isn't just sweet, it's profitable. The viral spread had created something unprecedented in aviation history, a discrimination scandal with immediate measurable financial consequences. Previous airline incidents had caused temporary stock drops and public relations nightmares. But this was different. This involved an investor with the power to single-handedly crater the company's valuation. Miguel Santos, Dr. Foster Jennifer Walsh, and dozens of other passengers had created a perfect storm of documented evidence, viral distribution, and public outrage. But the real storm was about to begin when Vincent Harrington opened the markets and started selling. Monday morning, 6:00 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The New York Stock Exchange wouldn't open for 3.5 hours, but Vincent Harrington was already in his Miami hotel suite laptop, open secure phone lines active, and prepared to launch the most expensive act of corporate revenge in aviation history. Marcus Vincent said into his headset, speaking to his assistant in New York, "Are the legal teams ready?" All 3 firms are standing by Vincent. Rebecca has the assault charges ready to file. David has the civil suit prepared, and Jennifer has the SEC complaints drafted. Good. And David Kim David's in the office with the trading team. They're ready to execute the full liquidation the moment markets open. Vincent looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The bandage on his temple was small but visible. The bruises on his shoulder had darkened overnight. His torn polo shirt was bagged as evidence, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Marcus, before we start this, I want you to understand something. What we're about to do will destroy Skywing Airlines. Completely. Thousands of people will lose their jobs. Pension funds will take massive losses. This will make headlines around the world." There was a pause on the line. "Vincent, what they did to you was wrong. You have every right to respond. I know. But I want everyone on the team to understand the scope of this. We're not just suing an airline. We're ending one." At exactly 9:30 a.m., when the opening bell rang at the New York Stock Exchange, Harrington Capital Group began selling every share of Skywing Airline stock they owned. $2.3 billion worth of shares hit the market simultaneously. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Skywing's stock price, which had closed Friday at $127 per share, opened Monday at $89. Within 15 minutes, it was trading at $67. By 10:00 a.m., trading was halted for excessive volatility. "Jesus Christ," muttered Tom Patterson, Skywing's chief financial officer, watching the carnage from the company's corporate headquarters. "Who the hell is selling? And why are they selling everything at once?" His assistant handed him a printout from Bloomberg Terminal. "Sir, it's Harrington Capital Group. They're liquidating their entire position." Tom's face went white. "Get Gerald on the phone. Now." CEO Gerald Hampton was in an emergency meeting when his assistant burst through the conference room doors. "Mr. Hampton, we have a problem. Harrington Capital is selling everything. Our stock is down 48% and falling." Gerald had been CEO of Skywing for 12 years. He'd navigated the airline through the 2008 financial crisis, 9/11 security changes, and the COVID pandemic. But he'd never seen anything like this. "How much are they selling?" "Everything, sir. Stock, bonds, credit facilities. They're calling in loans, canceling lines of credit, and dumping every financial instrument we've ever issued." Gerald's stomach dropped. "Get me Vincent Harrington on the phone immediately." But Vincent wasn't taking calls from Skywing executives. He was too busy destroying their company. The second phase of Vincent's attack was even more devastating than the stock sale. Harrington Capital Group held $800 million in Skywing corporate bonds. Instead of selling them on the open market, Vincent called them in for immediate repayment. Under the terms of the bond agreement, Skywing had 72 hours to repay the full principal amount, but Skywing didn't have $800 million in cash sitting around. Most airlines operated on thin margins with minimal cash reserves. "We can't pay it." CFO Patterson told Gerald during an emergency board call. "We don't have the cash. We'd have to liquidate assets, cancel routes, ground aircraft. What if we don't pay? Then we're in default. Our other bondholders can call their loans. Our credit lines get frozen. We'd be in bankruptcy by Friday." But Vincent wasn't done. The third phase of his assault targeted Skywing's operational cash flow. Harrington Capital had invested in several companies that did business with Skywing fuel suppliers, catering companies, maintenance contractors, even the company that provided those little bags of peanuts. Vincent made a series of phone calls Monday afternoon. "Jim, this is Vincent Harrington. I need you to put Skywing Airlines on cash-only terms immediately." "Yes, I know you've done business with them for 15 years. I don't care. Cash up front or no service." "Maria, it's Vincent. I need you to cancel Skywing's credit line for jet fuel purchases. Effective immediately. Yes, I know this will ground their fleet. That's the point. Robert Vincent Harrington here. I need you to freeze all maintenance contracts with Skywing until their outstanding invoices are paid in cash." By Tuesday morning, Skywing Airlines was facing a crisis unlike anything in aviation history. Their stock was trading at $34 per share, down 73% from Friday's close. Their bonds were junk. Their credit lines were frozen. And their operational partners were demanding cash payments the airline simply didn't have. But Vincent's masterstroke was still to come. Tuesday afternoon, he held a press conference at the Four Seasons in Miami. Every major financial news outlet was represented. The hotel's conference room was packed with reporters, cameramen, and photographers. Vincent walked to the podium wearing a navy suit that cost more than most people's cars. The small bandage on his temple was the only visible reminder of Saturday night's assault. But his presence commanded the room in a way that made it clear this was not a victim seeking sympathy. This was a predator announcing his kill. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vincent began, his voice calm and measured. "On Saturday evening, Skywing Airlines security officers physically assaulted me for the crime of sitting in my assigned first-class seat while being black. The room was silent except for the clicking of camera shutters. They did this based on one assumption that a black man in casual clothes couldn't possibly afford a $12,000 airline seat. They were wrong about my clothes. They were catastrophically wrong about my net worth. Vincent paused, letting the cameras capture his next words. As of this morning, Harrington Capital Group has liquidated all investments in Skywing Airlines. That represents $2.3 billion in stock, $800 million in bonds, and approximately $500 million in related credit facilities and derivative instruments. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Harrington, are you saying you owned over $3 billion of Skywing investments? Was not AM. As of today, Harrington Capital Group considers Skywing Airlines to be financially non-viable. We have zero confidence in their management, their culture, or their ability to operate as a going concern. Another reporter spoke up. Sir, what's your message to Skywing's management? Vincent's smile was cold as winter. My message is simple. You judged me by my appearance instead of my portfolio. You chose violence instead of customer service. And now you'll learn that some mistakes are too expensive to survive. The press conference lasted 30 minutes. Vincent answered every question with precision and authority. He provided documentation of his injuries, legal filings, and financial statements proving his ownership stake in Skywing. But the most devastating moment came when a reporter asked about Skywing's future. Mr. Harrington, do you think Skywing can survive this? Vincent looked directly into the camera and spoke words that would be replayed on every business news show for weeks. By Friday, Skywing Airlines will be bankrupt. By next month, they'll be liquidated. By Christmas, there'll be a case study in business schools about the cost of discrimination. And next year, when I launch Harrington Airways in their place, every employee will understand that we judge passengers by their character, not their color. The room erupted in shouting questions, but Vincent was done talking. He walked away from the podium without looking back, leaving behind the destruction of a major corporation and the promise of something better to rise from its ashes. By Wednesday morning, Skywing's stock was trading at $8 per share. Their bonds were worthless, their credit was destroyed, and their future was being decided in bankruptcy court instead of boardrooms. Vincent Harrington had kept his promise from 20 years ago. He was never powerless again, and this time he'd proven it in the most expensive way possible. By Wednesday morning, Skywing Airlines was in full collapse. The company that had been worth $8.7 billion on Friday afternoon was now trading for less than the value of its physical aircraft. Gerald Hampton, who had been CEO for 12 years, was about to learn that some decisions have consequences that extend far beyond the moment they're made. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Skywing's headquarters looked like a war zone. Coffee cups, legal documents, and laptops covered every surface. 12 board members sat around the mahogany table, their faces grim as CFO Tom Patterson delivered the death sentence. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 72 hours to pay Harrington Capital $800 million in bond redemptions. We currently have $87 million in available cash. Our credit lines have been frozen. Our operational partners are demanding cash payments we can't make. And our stock is now trading below the value of our fleet. Board member Elizabeth Warner, representing the pension fund that owned 6% of Skywing, spoke up. Tom, what are our options? We have 3 choices. Emergency. Chapter 11. Bankruptcy protection liquidation, or finding a white knight investor who can inject enough cash to keep us operational. What about the white knight option? Asked board member James Morrison. Tom laughed bitterly. Who's going to invest in an airline that just assaulted a passenger on camera? Every private equity firm, sovereign wealth fund, and strategic investor has seen the footage. Our brand is toxic. CEO Gerald Hampton had been silent throughout the meeting, but now he spoke up. We could settle with Harrington, offer him whatever he wants to make this go away. The room fell silent. Everyone knew that ship had sailed when Vincent held his press conference and declared war on their company. Rebecca Chen, Vincent's lead attorney, had already filed criminal assault charges against officers Brennan, Turner, and Rodriguez. She'd filed civil assault charges against the 3 officers personally. She'd filed a civil rights violation lawsuit against Skywing Airlines, and she'd filed complaints with the Department of Transportation and the Federal Aviation Administration. But the legal assault was only the beginning. Vincent's real weapon was financial, and he wielded it with surgical precision. Officer James Brennan was the first to feel the consequences. The airport security contractor fired him within hours of the video going viral. The criminal assault charges were filed Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday, Brennan's personal attorney was recommending he accept a plea deal to avoid jail time. "James, you're looking at felony assault charges," his lawyer explained. "The video evidence is overwhelming. The victim's injuries are documented, and the district attorney is under pressure to prosecute this to the full extent of the law." Brennan, sitting in his lawyer's office wearing a cheap suit instead of his security uniform, couldn't understand how everything had gone wrong so quickly. "I was just following procedure." The passenger was non-compliant. James, the passenger, was sitting in his assigned seat reading a book. There was no procedure that authorized you to throw an injured man onto a jet bridge. Officer Mike Turner was facing even more serious charges. A criminal background check conducted after his firing revealed that he'd lied on his employment application about previous excessive force incidents. He was now facing federal charges for assault under color of authority. Turner's world collapsed even faster than Brennan's. His apartment lease was terminated when his employers stopped paying him. His car was repossessed when he missed 2 payments, and his girlfriend left him when reporters started camping outside their building. But it was Roberto Valdez who faced the most comprehensive destruction of his life. As the gate supervisor who had initiated the incident, Roberto was facing criminal charges for false imprisonment and violation of civil rights. Skywing fired him for cause, which meant 0 severance and forfeiture of his pension. Roberto had worked for Skywing for 8 years. He had a mortgage on a modest 3-bedroom house in Orlando. His wife Maria ran a small catering business. Their 2 kids were in middle school and high school, and now, because of 15 minutes of bad judgment, everything was gone. "Roberto, we need to talk about options," his lawyer said during their Wednesday meeting. "The civil rights charges are federal. If convicted, you're looking at prison time." Roberto, who had aged 10 years in 3 days, stared at the legal documents spread across the table. "I was just trying to do my job." The woman said she felt threatened. "I thought I was helping." "Roberto, you ordered the removal of a passenger who was sitting quietly in his assigned seat. You called security on a man who hadn't committed any crime, and you did it based on racial assumptions that you can't defend in court." The most spectacular downfall belonged to Patricia and Harold Whitmore. Patricia's 5 minutes of airline karma had cost her husband his career and their entire lifestyle. Harold, as CFO of Morrison Industries, was bound by a morality clause in his executive contract. When the video went viral showing Patricia initiating the confrontation that led to a passenger assault, Morrison's board considered Harold a liability. Harold, the board, has voted Morrison's CEO, explained during their Thursday morning meeting. "Your wife's behavior has brought the company into disrepute. We're terminating your employment for cause." Termination for cause meant 0 severance, 0 golden parachute, and forfeiture of all unvested stock options. Harold's $800,000 annual salary disappeared overnight, but the real catastrophe was their leveraged lifestyle. Patricia and Harold lived paycheck to massive paycheck. They had a $4.2 million mortgage on their Park Avenue penthouse. They had a $2.8 million mortgage on their Hampton summer house. They had lease payments on 2 Range Rovers, private school tuition for their teenage daughter, and credit card debt that assumed Harold's salary would continue forever. Without Harold's income, their house of cards collapsed in 90 days. The foreclosure notices were filed. The cars were repossessed. Their daughter had to transfer to public school. And Patricia, who had lived her entire adult life on someone else's money, had to get her first job in 30 years. The most painful moment came when Patricia tried to book a flight to visit her sister in California. She approached the Skywing ticket counter at JFK, still living in denial about what she had caused. "I need a first-class ticket to Los Angeles," she told the gate agent. The agent looked at her driver's license and paused. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you're on our no-fly list." "What?" "That's impossible. I'm a Platinum Elite member." "Ma'am, your membership was terminated. You're banned from all Skywing flights for life." Patricia, who 3 months earlier had demanded a man be removed from first class, was now herself banned from flying the airline she had once felt entitled to command. But the consequences extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Skywing's collapse sent shockwaves through the entire aviation industry. The pilots' union voted no confidence in management and announced they would seek employment with other airlines. The flight attendants' union filed grievances over unsafe working conditions and began organizing job fairs with competing carriers. Ground crews mechanics and gate agents started updating their resumes. Sarah Mitchell, the flight attendant who had tried to de-escalate the situation, was facing her own crisis. She was a single mother with student loan debt who needed her job to survive. But she also couldn't stomach working for a company that had assaulted a passenger. "I can't sleep," she told her roommate. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them dragging that man off the plane. And I see the blood on the carpet. How do I go back to work for a company that did that?" The industry-wide consequences were immediate and severe. Other airlines began reviewing their own policies and training programs, terrified that they might face similar scrutiny. Airport security contractors fired dozens of officers and implemented new use-of-force policies. And the Department of Transportation announced industry-wide investigations into discrimination complaints. But the financial consequences were the most devastating. Skywing's collapse wiped out pension funds, retirement accounts, and investment portfolios. Teachers in Ohio who had Skywing stock in their 401k accounts lost their retirement savings. University endowments that had invested in Skywing bonds faced massive losses. The human cost was staggering. 43,000 Skywing employees faced unemployment. Hundreds of small businesses that depended on Skywing contracts faced bankruptcy. Airports that relied on Skywing gates and routes faced revenue shortfalls. Critics argued that Vincent's response was disproportionate. They claimed that destroying an entire company over one incident was excessive, that thousands of innocent people were being punished for the actions of a few individuals. But Vincent's response was cold and calculated. During a Thursday interview with Bloomberg Television, he addressed the criticism directly. "Let me be clear about something," Vincent said, looking directly into the camera. "Skywing Airlines didn't assault me by accident. They assaulted me because their culture, their training, and their assumptions made it inevitable. This wasn't one bad employee making one mistake. This was an institutional failure that could only be corrected by institutional consequences." The interviewer pressed him. "Mr. Harrington, 43,000 people are going to lose their jobs. Don't you feel any responsibility for that?" Vincent's expression didn't change. "I feel responsible for proving that discrimination has costs. Real costs. Expensive costs. And if 43,000 people lose their jobs because their company chose bias over business sense, maybe the next company will make better choices." By Friday afternoon, Skywing Airlines filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. By the following Monday, they had announced the liquidation of all assets. And by the end of the month, Vincent Harrington owned the gates, the routes, the aircraft, and the corporate headquarters of the company that had dragged him bleeding off a plane 6 weeks earlier. The most expensive mistake in aviation history had cost Skywing their existence. But for Vincent Harrington, it was just the beginning of something much bigger. 6 months after Skywing Airlines filed for bankruptcy, Vincent Harrington stood in the renovated corporate headquarters of what was now Harrington Airways. The mahogany conference table where Skywing's board had met for the last time had been replaced with a sustainable bamboo table that seated 24 people from diverse backgrounds. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vincent said to the assembled group of new executives, "today we make a promise. Not just to our shareholders, not just to our customers, but to ourselves. We promise that every person who steps onto a Harrington Airways aircraft will be treated with dignity, respect, and equality. Not because it's good business, though it is, because it's who we are." The transformation had been remarkable. Vincent had acquired Skywing's assets for $1.2 billion, a fraction of their original value. He'd invested another $800 million in fleet modernization, employee training, and cultural transformation. And he'd hired a completely new leadership team focused on inclusive excellence. Sarah Mitchell sat at that bamboo table as the new head of cabin culture, a position that didn't exist at Skywing but was essential at Harrington Airways. The single mother who had cried watching Vincent get dragged off the plane was now earning twice her previous salary and had completed her MBA with a full scholarship from the Harrington Foundation. "Mr. Harrington," Sarah said during the meeting, "I want to share something with you. Yesterday, I worked a flight from Miami to New York. An elderly black gentleman was flying first class, and I watched our crew treat him like royalty. Not because they knew you were watching, but because that's what we do now. That's who we've become." Dr. Amanda Foster, the cardiologist who had documented Vincent's assault, was now Harrington Airways' chief medical officer. Her job was ensuring passenger safety from a medical perspective, but more importantly, she oversaw the airline's trauma-informed customer service approach. Vincent, Dr. Foster said the complaint numbers speak for themselves. "In 6 months of operation, we've received 0 discrimination complaints. 0. Do you understand how unprecedented that is in aviation?" Miguel Santos, the marketing student who had filmed the original assault, was now Harrington Airways' Director of Social Impact. His Instagram following had grown to over 2 million people, and he used that platform to promote the airline's commitment to equality and justice. "The video that went viral wasn't just about one bad flight," Miguel said during the meeting. "It was about what happens when ordinary people decide to speak up. And now we've built an airline where speaking up isn't just welcomed, it's required. But the real transformation wasn't visible in executive meetings or corporate policies. It was visible in small moments that happened every day on Harrington Airways flights. Like the time a young Hispanic man in economy was randomly selected for an upgrade to first class, and instead of questioning whether he belonged there, the flight crew made sure he felt welcomed and comfortable. Like the time an elderly Asian woman with limited English was traveling alone, and the entire crew took turns checking on her, ensuring she understood the safety announcements and felt cared for throughout the flight. Like the time a young black girl flying alone for the first time was nervous about being in first class, and Captain Maria Rodriguez personally welcomed her aboard and invited her to see the cockpit. These weren't publicity stunts or corporate initiatives. They were the natural result of hiring and training people who understood that their job was more than moving passengers from point A to point B. Their job was proving that respect and dignity could be scalable business models. The industry had taken notice. Other airlines began implementing Harrington's training programs. Airport security contractors adopted Harrington's de-escalation protocols. And the Department of Transportation held up Harrington Airways as a model for the entire industry. But for Vincent, the real victory wasn't measured in stock prices or industry awards. It was measured in moments like the one that happened on a Tuesday evening in December. Vincent was flying from New York to Miami on Harrington Airways Flight 618, the same route number as the Skywing flight where he'd been assaulted. He was sitting in seat 1A reading the same first edition copy of The Intelligent Investor that had been knocked from his hands 9 months earlier. A young black teenager named Marcus Johnson was boarding the aircraft, flying alone for the first time. He had won an essay contest that included a first-class ticket, but he was nervous about whether he really belonged in the expensive section of the plane. Marcus approached seat 1B with his boarding pass in hand, but hesitated when he saw other passengers looking at him. The old familiar fear crept in. The fear that someone would question whether he had the right to be there, whether his ticket was real, whether he belonged. Sarah Mitchell, now an experienced head of cabin culture, immediately noticed Marcus's hesitation. She approached with a genuine smile that had nothing to do with corporate training and everything to do with human kindness. "Good evening, Mr. Johnson," Sarah said, reading his name from the passenger manifest. "Welcome to first class. Is this your first time flying with us?" Marcus nodded, still nervous. "Yes, ma'am. I won this ticket in a contest, but I'm not sure if—" "You picked the perfect seat," Sarah interrupted gently. "1B has the best view during takeoff." "And Mr. Johnson, you earned this seat. You belong here." Vincent looked up from his book and caught the young man's eye. He saw himself 20 years ago, young, accomplished, but still worried about whether the world would accept him in spaces where he'd earned the right to be. "First time in first class?" Vincent asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. I won an essay contest about overcoming challenges, but I'm still kind of nervous about being up here." Vincent smiled and held up his book. "Want to know a secret? This book taught me that the best investment you can make is in yourself. You wrote an essay good enough to win this seat. That means you're smart enough to be wherever you want to go in life." Marcus smiled for the first time since boarding. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." Vincent closed his book and looked around the cabin. Passengers were settling in with champagne and warm towels. The crew was preparing for departure with efficiency and grace, and a young black teenager was sitting comfortably in first class, no longer worried about whether he belonged. This was what justice looked like. Not revenge, not punishment, but transformation. The creation of spaces where dignity wasn't a privilege to be earned, but a standard to be assumed. As Flight 617 pushed back from the gate, Vincent reflected on the journey from that violent Saturday night to this moment of quiet triumph. The scars on his temple had healed completely, but the memory remained sharp not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of what was possible when people chose to act instead of accepting the unacceptable. Sarah Mitchell announced over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Harrington Airways Flight 608. Our flight time to Miami will be 2 hours and 35 minutes. But more importantly, your journey with us begins with a simple promise. You belong here, you matter here, and you will be treated with the respect you deserve." The announcement drew applause from passengers, but Vincent knew it wasn't performative. It was authentic. Because every person on that aircraft, from the pilots to the gate agents to the cleaning crew, understood that their job wasn't just about aviation. It was about proving that change was possible, that businesses could profit from doing the right thing, and that dignity was always worth fighting for. As the Boeing 777 reached cruising altitude, Vincent opened his book to a page he had marked months earlier. The stock market is a voting machine in the short run, but a weighing machine in the long run. He smiled, knowing that justice worked the same way. In the short run, bias and cruelty might seem powerful, but in the long run, dignity and respect always proved their true worth. Marcus Johnson, the teenager in seat 1B, was reading his own book now, a collection of essays by James Baldwin that had inspired his contest-winning piece. He looked completely at ease, his earlier nervousness replaced by the confidence that comes from feeling truly welcome. Vincent caught his eye one more time. "What's your book about?" Marcus looked up. "It's about fighting for equality and justice, about never accepting that things have to stay the way they are." Vincent nodded approvingly. Sounds like required reading for anyone who wants to change the world. As Flight 618 continued toward Miami, Vincent closed his eyes and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. Not because he had won a battle, but because he had built something lasting. Not because he had destroyed his enemies, but because he had created a model that proved there was a better way forward. As Flight 618 lifted off into the Miami sunset, Vincent closed his book and reflected on the journey from that violent Saturday night to this moment of quiet triumph. The boy in 1B was reading a James Baldwin essay completely at ease, his earlier nervousness replaced by the confidence that comes from feeling truly welcome. This was the real victory, not the billions lost or gained, but the simple dignity of a young person feeling safe in his own seat. The scars on Vincent's temple had healed, but the memory remained sharp as a reminder that change requires more than good intentions. It demands action, sacrifice, and the courage to use privilege for justice. Harrington Airways wasn't just an airline. It was proof that businesses could profit from decency, that treating people with respect wasn't just morally right, but financially smart. Every employee, from pilot to ground crew, understood that their job wasn't just moving people from point A to point B, it was moving society forward. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Vincent opened his book to a page he had marked months ago. The stock market is a voting machine in the short run, but a weighing machine in the long run. He smiled, knowing that justice worked the same way. In the short run, bias and cruelty might seem powerful, but in the long run, dignity and respect always prove their true worth. And sometimes justice doesn't just prevail, it takes flight. What did you think about this incredible story of justice transformation and the power of standing up for what's right? Vincent's journey from being dragged off that plane to building an airline empire shows us that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't anger, it's action. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe that change is possible, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, smash that like button. It really helps the algorithm know that you want to see more stories like this about justice, dignity, and never giving up when you're right. Second, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We share stories every week about people who refuse to accept the unacceptable and change the world in the process. Your subscription helps us keep bringing you these incredible true stories of triumph. And finally, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's someone who's facing discrimination themselves. Maybe it's someone who has the power to make changes in their workplace or community. Or maybe it's just someone who needs to be reminded that one person really can make a difference. Drop a comment below and let me know. Have you ever stood up against injustice, even when it was scary? What happened? Your story could inspire someone else watching this video. Remember, you belong wherever you've earned the right to be, and your voice matters more than you know. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight and never forget that dignity and respect aren't privileges, they're rights that everyone deserves.